Okay, just got to the FBO and I've made a goal for myself to be in the air by 9 a.m. every morning, and that gives me about 30 minutes to pre-flight and take off. So we're gonna continue this conversation in the air after I've got all of that done. Prop clear. Let's talk about why I bought this airplane specifically and the mission statement and the budget that led me to make that decision. Before I get into that though, I want to talk about the paint job. This is, I think, a fantastic looking airplane. Obviously I didn't pick the paint scheme, I just bought it from the builder. He was building an RV-12, and when I went out to pick up this, the painter who had painted this plane was there to paint his new RV-12. So I got to meet him, and that was really cool. He's a great guy. I will put a link to his website in the description. If you're in the market for a new paint job for your airplane, or honestly anything else, he's painted all kinds of different things, I would highly recommend that you reach out to him. He does phenomenal work. I've seen him work now in person, and being in a plane that he painted, like, it is really top tier, worth every penny. Granted, I don't know how much the builder paid him to paint this plane, but it was worth it. With the paint job out of the way, let's talk about the mission statement and the budget, which is what led me to purchase this airplane. Those two things are really what everyone should consider when you're in the market for an airplane. And it doesn't matter if you're buying it for personal use or for business use. The mission and the budget is how you determine what airplane is right for you. I'm going to go through my entire thought process and the chain of logic that I use to get to where I'm at with this plane. Hopefully this will help you make an informed decision when you are in the market for an airplane. The mission statement that my wife and I came up with is, how do I get to 1,500 hours as fast as possible and as cheap as possible? With that mission statement in mind, our budget started really low. I mean, we were originally looking at $30, $40, maybe $50,000, and that was spurred on by the $40,000 Cessna 150 that we found at our local airport. That was really before I kind of knew what a $40,000 or $50,000 airplane really consisted of. When I first told people, students at the flight school or my instructor or whatever, anyone I talked to, and I said, hey, I'm going to get an airplane to build time, everyone said the same thing. It was like, oh yeah, just get a 150 or 152 or an Archer or something like that. Just get one of those older planes. I looked quite a bit at all of those, the different certified planes. In the $40,000 to $50,000 price range, there's not a lot of really good options. A ton of really high hour planes, a lot of landings, a lot of former flight school planes. I did not necessarily find a ton that was in that price range that I would have felt good about. The reason why is because most of those planes, they're built in the 1960s, maybe in the 1970s. They're very old. Some of them had recently overhauled engines. Some of them had updated avionics, like maybe they had a G5 or two G5s. Ultimately though, I was worried about buying an airplane that old. I've been an aircraft mechanic. I worked on the B-2 stealth bomber. That's also an old airplane. You would be surprised at how many different things there are in an airplane. Even with really small airplanes, there's still so many different components. It's not just the engine and the tires and the brakes or the avionics package, because even if all of those are updated in a 70 or 80 year old airplane, almost everything else on that airplane is 70 or 80 years old, or 50, 60. It doesn't really matter. It's a very old airplane. To line that up with my mission statement, how do I get to 1,500 hours as fast as possible? If I buy a really cheap airplane that's also really old, I was worried that I was going to spend more time not flying because the plane is going to be in the shop getting fixed than I would spend flying. Because of that concern that I had, I started looking at, what else is in that price range, and Kitplanes experimental started to come up, primarily Sonex. A lot of the ones I found, they're 10 years old. Most of them only had 100 to 200 hours on them. When I saw that, I thought, wow, this is probably my best ticket. Most of the Sonex airplanes have the Jabiru engine or the Aerovee kit engine, and they're all going to get around 5-6 gallons per hour. Super economical and really decent performance for what you're getting. So I started looking at a bunch of Sonex aircraft. I'll make a separate video because I tried to buy two separate Sonex aircraft, and both of those kind of ended up in disaster. The first one ended up getting crashed before I went to pick it up. The second one was through an estate auction that fell through. When the pre-buy inspection came back with a crack in the engine case. Either way, both of those were kind of a nightmare. I lost quite a bit of time and money. Well, not the first one, but the second one I gave up quite a bit of money and ended up not buying an airplane. So after having those two experiences with the Sonex aircraft, I started to notice something which I thought was a really good thing when I first started looking. The planes are only about $30,000-$40,000. They're not that old, and most of the time they only have 100 to 200 hours on the engine. That's when it dawned on me, I'm buying this airplane to build time, 1,400 hours. If all of the planes have 100 to 200 hours, that did not instill a lot of confidence in me in the platform. Granted, I don't think there's anything wrong with Sonex aircraft, but I did have a concern with the engines that they were using. I haven't heard anything bad necessarily about Jabiru or the Aerovee engines. However, what I did notice is that the time before overhaul on the website for the Aerovee engines, at least, which is what most Sonex have, the TBO on those Aerovee engines was only like 1,200 hours. I knew that I was going to, at some point, have to overhaul the engine.
We should make it prior. Let's keep traffic. Sounds good.
Aside from the engine, the other thing I was noticing is when I go to sell this airplane, because it's not the plane that I would want to keep for myself just to have to fly for fun, it is just a cheap time builder. When I go to sell it, if all of the other Sonex are selling for 30, 40, maybe $50,000 on the very high end, and most of them have 100 to 200 hours, why would someone consider my airplane, even if it has a recently overhauled engine that has 1,500, 1,600 hours on it, for the same price as what you could get that only has 100 or 200 hours? So when I was thinking about, okay, what's the cheapest way that I can get to 1,500 hours if I spend $40,000 on a Sonex, another $20,000 on an engine overhaul, and then I'm only able to sell it for $20,000 because it's got way more hours on it than everything else that I've seen on the market. That's a huge loss. Once I realized that, my wife and I really started to think about it, and she said, well, what kind of airplanes are available for, let's say, $80,000 to $100,000? I said, I don't know, I'll look. At that price range, you get back into, let's say, 150s, 152s, Piper Archers, some nicer Cessna 172s. Even at those price ranges, they're still mostly late 60s, early 70s, maybe mid 70s. All you're really getting for that extra money, slightly less hours on the engine and a little bit more updated panel. That's not a full glass cockpit, but it is more common to find in that price range. Maybe it'll have a 625 or 635, and I think that's nice. It's a really good thing. There are a ton of really good options in that $80,000 to $100,000 price range. The problem that I still ran into is it was still built in 1968. So even at that higher price range, I just did not necessarily feel like having a certified plane made a lot of sense. Not only is every component on that plane really old, getting it maintained by a shop is way more expensive than on the experimental side. Even at that price range, I was looking at what kind of experimental planes can I get in that price range. Sometimes you could find like older glass airs and stuff, but really, all of a sudden a bunch of Vans aircraft started popping up. I did some research. Obviously it doesn't take long to find out that Vans is very well regarded, highly respected. They're well engineered kits. So I started to look, and there were two Vans that I found, an RV9 and an RV9A. Both of them, they were on Barnstormers. The one guy I called, I think less than 24 hours after the listing went live, and he said someone was already coming to pick it up. I was like, okay, well, that's a bummer. The other one, it was maybe 2 days after it had been posted that I called him, and same thing. He was just like, no, someone's already coming. You know, if it falls through, I'll let you know. But I kept looking, and we were really sticking to the $100,000 price range. At that price range that I was looking at for those Vans aircraft, it was a little bit more than we were planning on spending, but that's when it dawned on me, these planes are actually really nice. A lot of them were new, let's say 10 years old or newer. Most of them had low hours, glass cockpits, whether it was Dynon or Garmin. And that's when I realized that when I was looking at the Sonex airplanes, most of them had 100 to 200 or 300 hours. A lot of the Vans that I saw were between 2,000 and 5,000 or 6,000 hours. And that's when I realized, oh, this is something that if I get a low hour Vans, it's not going to be out of the norm for me to put 1,400 hours on it and then resell it when that time comes. It will still be in the range of what's normal for a Vans aircraft. So it's not going to look abnormal, or no one's going to expect a huge depreciation on the plane when I go to sell it, just because it has a couple thousand hours on it. So with that perspective in mind, I was thinking it might not necessarily be what we wanted to do, is spend this much money. But if, and granted it's still an if, I haven't sold the plane yet, I'm still time building, but if I'm able to sell it for roughly what I bought it for, which is not necessarily uncommon for the right kind of aircraft, I'll be better off than buying a cheaper airplane that I put a bunch of hours on. Let's say with the Sonex, if I buy a $40,000 airplane, put another $20,000 into the engine overhaul, and then I'm not able to sell it for what I paid for it. It would be better, let's say if you buy a $120,000 airplane, you do your time building, you're obviously going to be out your maintenance and your gas, but if no major maintenance comes up, you should be able to get almost what you paid for it. So that's the biggest reason why I thought, okay, it's probably going to be worth it because if I spend a little bit more money, a newer plane with lower hours, I should be able to fly the crap out of it, get my hours, and not have really any time stuck in maintenance, right? Outside of oil changes, brake pads, tires, just basic wearable items, I'm hoping that there is no major mechanical issue that comes up. Now, because it's a kit plane, that does open the door to build quality, right? Because this is not built in a factory by, so-called professionals. It is built by some random person that is in their garage or their hangar or whatever, and they're just putting it together themselves. You'll notice if you do look for kit planes, some are going to be a little bit better built than others. When I saw this one pop up on Barnstormers, it was very impressive. And I'm not saying that just because I now own it. It is a Bronze Lindy Award winner from Oshkosh. That's huge. It also got an award at Sun and Fun in Florida. The builder worked at Van's Aircraft in the prototype shop, and it only had, I think, 255 hours on it, and it had the awesome paint job. So with all that in mind, even though this was way more expensive than we were planning on spending on an airplane, that chain of logic is what led me to really heavily consider this airplane. So coming full circle, I know this was a long video, but I want to summarize. The mission statement is, how do I get to 1,500 hours as fast as possible and as cheap as possible? A budget, again, that started out really low, but what we realized is if I want to get those kind of conflicting values of as fast as possible and as cheap as possible, it's going to make more sense to spend more money than we were planning on to get a nicer airplane that's going to hold its value better and spend less time in the shop. I'm not going to get to 1,500 hours if the airplane's in the shop getting fixed. I don't imagine there's too many 18, 19-year-olds that are going through flight school and want to be an airline pilot that have the money to go get a plane to build hours this way. For the handful of people out there that are in the same situation or a similar situation to me, and you're thinking, maybe I'll get a plane, I don't think there's anything wrong with getting a certified plane. In a lot of ways, it's going to be a little bit easier. You can, if you want to, rent it out to other people and try to make money that way, or at least subsidize your cost. It is a little bit easier and cheaper to get insurance for certified aircraft, and most instructors will have no problem hopping in a certified plane, even if it is an old rust bucket. If you buy an experimental plane, it is going to be a little bit more difficult to find insurance, especially if you're a new low-time pilot. It is going to be expensive. Just a heads up, there's just not an easy way to do it. It took me a while to actually find decent insurance that is not outrageous. Part of that is also just because this plane is a tailwheel. So I'm not saying that you should go experimental like I did. I just think that you should be considering all those factors. The last point that I'm going to make, though, that is also a big deciding factor for why I went experimental instead of certified. The performance that you get is typically way better in an experimental versus a certified plane. What I mean by performance is how fast you can fly, how fast you can climb, and how much fuel you burn doing it. We're going into winter right now, and so it's not as big of an issue, but I know as I was going through flight training, I started in June or the end of May. The flight school that I was in had all 172 Hawk XPs. So they were somewhere, 205 to 215 horsepower with constant speed props. Even with that, those planes still struggled to climb in the summer. Sometimes you were averaging 200 or 300 feet per minute. Where I live in southern Utah, it gets really hot in the summer, and there's a lot of elevation changes, a lot. So it's not uncommon to have to circle to climb. And if you're going to get a 150 or one of the older Archers, that is going to be a concern. Now, depending on where you live, if there's not a ton of elevation change, no big deal. Admittedly, if you're going to get a 150 or something like that, and you're flying by yourself, it's not as much of an issue. But if you do ever want to fly with someone else, that's just a problem that I did not want to have. I did not want to have to worry that much about not having enough useful load to take full fuel to get somewhere, especially because a lot of those planes don't even have that far of a range anyway. When I was looking at the performance of this plane, of a lot of the Vans, but I ended up with an RV7, the weight balance is super easy. You don't have it's basically, it's a square. You don't have a forward limit that's lower than your gross weight. I know that as long as I'm under gross weight, I'm good to go. It makes it easy. Not that doing weight and balance is really that difficult, but it is just one less thing that I have to really think about or worry about when I'm doing flight planning, which granted, most of the time, 99% of the time, I'm just in here by myself, so it's not that much of a consideration anyway. But on a handful of occasions when I have flown with other people, it is nice to know. All I got to do is well, how much do you weigh? Okay, cool, we're good to go. I don't have to think about it. It's okay, well, depending on where the seats are or the baggage or whatever, I just know as long as I'm under gross weight, we're good to go. So for me, in my situation, That's why I started looking at experimentals and Van's aircraft in particular. We're starting our descent into Hanksville. That's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about when it came to why I bought this airplane, the methodology behind my thought process. I wanted to explain that because I think there are a handful of people out there that are considering buying an airplane to build time. Obviously, depending on your budget, because I said we started with a low budget and ended up spending way more than we were planning on. We were able to pay cash for the plane. We didn't take out a loan. So we had the money sitting there, right? So our budget was really just up to how much we felt like we wanted to spend, what felt comfortable to us. If you're more legitimately constrained, like, no, there's no way I could spend more than $60,000 or $70,000 on an airplane, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you can find, it might take you a little bit longer to find a good deal, but they are there. You can find a good plane. Just know that those are some of the compromises that you might come up with in that price range. Is if you're trying to go quickly, your plane could spend a little bit of time in the shop if there are things that come up that break. And if it's a certified plane, it's going to be a little bit more expensive, or sometimes a lot more expensive than if it were an experimental plane getting fixed. Hopefully this helped you if you're in the market to buy a plane. I appreciate you watching and wish you the best of luck in your airplane buying adventures. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.